Each of us has our own dream. The only question is, what are you willing to do for your dream? Do you dare to challenge your family, take risks? Are you ready to lose everything? What if I give you a choice? Imagine that on one side of scale there are family, a stable well-paid job, and life, while on the other side there are a dream, constant risk, the unknown. What will you choose? And while you make your choice, I will tell you the story of one dream. Three-time Formula One champion Niki Lauda is a special driver. The film Rush was made about the dramatic fight for the title between him and James Hunt in 1976 season. But perhaps to really get to know Niki, it's needed to make a series, because this is a truly fascinating story about passion for your business, the thorny path to your dream, and rewarded constancy. To exchange a secure future and high social status for thrills, unguaranteed fame, while putting his life on the line. This is Niki Lauda. Andreas Nicholas Lauda was born into a family of Austrian bankers in Vienna on February 22, 1949. The parents of the future racer were successful bankers and serious participants in the financial market. The family was wealthy, owned the Austrian paper industry, and Nicholas' grandfather, Dr. Hans Lauda, was a major industrialist. He had a nickname Old Man Lauda, and it had nothing to do with age. None of the family members had any doubt that Niki would continue his father's work. However, the boy's dream differed from the expectation of his parents. The life of the famous Austrian developed in such a way that he had to become a participant in the financial market as a client of banking services. But more on it later. And it all started with the fact that relatives trusted a 12-year-old teenager to park their cars. If only they knew what this would lead to. Our hero got his first cars quite early. Stealing a mean little Austin Cooper S1300 from Dad's garage doesn't count. Yeah, Lauda stopped at nothing on the way to his dream. Together with his friend Peter Drexler, who was also a guy from a wealthy family, Niki repeatedly took his father's car from the garage and raced it on mountain roads. Young Lauda crashed the car. With his pocket money, Lauda was able to buy himself a used Volkswagen Beetle. Niki was having a blast. He drove around the yard in his car, endlessly disassembling and reassembling the engine. And then he decided to set a jumping distance record in his car. Niki Lauda built a springboard to see how far his Beetle could fly. It turned out to be 22 meters, and when setting his record, his sprints literally went up. When Niki decided that his calling was to be a car mechanic, dropped out of school and instead got a job involving BMW repair shop, which, as you might guess, didn't cause much joy in the family. It was fun, but he didn't stay there for long. One day, Niki, while changing the oil on the car of a very nervous businessman, unscrewed the oil pan nut in the wrong direction and, as a result, tore the thread of the screw. Niki went to the master and asked him to take a look. The master, of course, immediately realized what was wrong, and a huge scandal arose, since now the entire engine had to be removed. After a year of dodging flying wrenches, Niki approached his father and said that he felt a craving for mental activity again. At first, the parents didn't worry about their son's passion. For the sake of racing, Niki often deceived relatives and begged money from them. And yet, sometimes Niki managed to make peculiar deals with his parents. However, even his grandfather, Old Man Lauda, promised Niki to buy him a small car for successfully passing the English exam. Our hero categorically didn't like studying. But when Niki came with a report card with a selling question to his grandpa's 20-room apartment in the center of Vienna, the old man yelled at him and called him an impudent man. In fact, Grandpa was greedy for money and wasn't ready to spend money on anyone but himself. But Niki was persistent in his desires and realized that by any means he needed to get a personal sports car. Having forged a diploma of education, Niki received a major bonus from his relative and bought himself a Volkswagen Beetle for 50,000 shillings. And this is where we return to Niki's car fifths. Because it happens that Niki's school friend, Drexler, who himself didn't have a license, one night wanted to drive the exciting Mini Cooper S that was in his father's garage. He just wanted to sell it and ask for 38,000 shillings. Young Drexel stole the car and Niki was the driver. At 4 o'clock in the morning, at full speed along Vienna's Heinstrasse, Lauda drove onto an icy part of the bridge, and the car hit the high curb sidewalks. At the same time, the left wheels broke, everything was bent and damaged. The guys didn't want any trouble, so Niki went straight from Heinstrasse to his grandmother's apartment, pulled her out of bed and said, "I just crashed a car. It will cost 38,000 shillings, and if I don't pay, I'll go to prison." The grandmother got dressed, went with Niki to the bank and gave her grandson money. With them, the young racer appeared in front of Mr. Drexler and said, "I would like to buy your car, please." And suddenly Niki became the owner of 2 cars, an old Volkswagen and a broken Mini. However, he quickly sold the Beetle and spent the money on repairing the Mini. It will seem that what else a young motorsport fan needs to be happy. However, fate throws a new temptation at Niki. At the time, there was a certain Fritz Baumgartner, the king of Mini and a prominent figure in Austrian motorsport. In auto review, he placed an advertisement for the sale of his Mini S in a sports version. And, of course, our unemployed hero, without a proper education and basically without anything at all, went to look at the car. It was a dark blue racing Mini without engine. Using his charisma and ability to persuade, Niki makes friends with the Fritz, and soon, after a family dinner with Lauda family, they together install a motor in a Mini in garage of Lauda's parents, and agree that Fritz will give Niki a racing Mini, and he will give him a repaired road car, Mini Plus, and 15,000 shillings, the young racing mind of at that time. And then the parents became a little worried when they saw that their son was equipped a racing car. However, Niki promised them that this is a kind of hobby, and of course he will never race it. And a couple of days later, on April 15, 1968, his first race in his life was supposed to take place. It took place in Milken in Upper Austria. It was a classic hill climb. They were very popular in those days. In the first race, Niki was third, in the second first, but in the end he took second place in total results. Meanwhile, Baumgartner began to suffer from remorse, or maybe he was afraid for the remaining 50,000 shillings. Anyway, he went to Niki's father and told him that his son had raced at the first race, that he was very talented and that for God's sake he had to stop Niki from running the next race. This is a mountain race in Dobrich, a very difficult one, a stage of the European Championship with dangerous turns and deep cliffs. Niki must be protected from this. Thus, Fritz Baumgartner posed as a caring friend and probably received his 15,000. Of course, Niki's father gave his son a will scolding and was horrified by the lie.
With all his authority, he ordered me not to start in Dubra, and I had almost nothing to hope for. The situation I found myself in was absurd and funny at the same time. I no longer had a personal car, but I had a racing car without license plates in the garage, and I could not participate in races. After analyzing the situation, I decided, whatever happens, it cannot be avoided. On April 28, I will start in Dobrosh. A school friend lent me his dad's BMW Vate with a trailer. Another friend gave me 3,000 shillings for petrol. And in the middle of the night, I wheeled my Mini out of the garage and loaded it up. Thus, my friend Ursula Pistiger and I appeared in Dubrovnik. At first, the car ran rough and spit terribly, but another friend's mechanic tuned the engine, and I easily won my class. When I returned home, my father already knew about everything from the newspapers. He said he's had enough now. As soon as I could afford it, I left my parents' house. Sometimes people ask me why I got it so firmly into my head that I would become a racer. I don't know. It just so happened that nothing in the world interested me nearly as much. Going to university or learning some ordinary profession is absolutely not for me. But inside the world of motorsport, I looked at things quite soberly and always thought about the next step. First, the driver's license, then further, but so that the next stage remains in sight. I also didn't have an idol with whom I could identify, although at that time there was a real hero. Jim Clark. Clark crashed exactly a week before my first race. I remember that moment well. This disturbed me to the core, and I was very upset, but only in the sense. It's a pity. We will miss him. The world is poorer without him. However, there was nothing that could discourage me from motorsport. Not death, not suffering or sympathy. The thought that I was going to put my life in danger in the coming weeks, months, and years, of course, did not occur to the 19-year-old guy.
Niki's career developed very rapidly. Austria realized that it was impossible to stand still, and the next year was key. Once he was able to make a name for himself behind the wheel of a Mini, it wasn't enough. It was necessary to take the next step. And 8 weeks after his first start in a Mini Cooper, he was already sitting in a Porsche 911, which he paid for the expense of Mini, another pilgrimage to his grandmother and, of course, debts. Lauda participated wherever he could, both in mountain racing and in airfield races, because in Austria, at that time, there were practically no stationary race tracks, and he was pretty good, or at least good enough to be noticed. In 1969, Niki got his chance in Formula V, something like modern Formula 4, with Kurt Bergmann's Cayman team. Yeah, Lauda took his first step into open-wheel racing and began to quickly learn everything, and learned quite successfully. And already in 1970, the young racer found himself behind the wheel of a Formula 3 car. Although he was constantly on the verge of financial possibilities, he was nevertheless carefree. The engine and chassis were basically equivalent and at the limit of their capabilities. In addition, there were 25 people approximately equally fast, and no one wanted to give up. The races flew in formation over potholes at speed of 200 km per hour and pushed each other. You had to be crazy to drive that formula. And in 1970, Niki was. The debut in Formula 3 held in France in Nagara became typical for the entire season. At the very first training session, Lauda stuck close to the aerodynamic shadow of George Pankon. He tried to pass him, but
At that moment, the engine stalled. I ran my left front wheel onto its right rear wheel, took off, flew over one of the marshals, landed in front of the bump stop, lost all my wheels, and slid 100 meters along the bump stop. After this, there was nothing left of the car worth mentioning. It happened in my first 5 minutes in Formula 3, in my first practice.
upon returning home, having borrowed even more money, Niki bought another chassis. It was prepared for the Nürburgring. By going fifth in the race, Niki again flew off the track for no apparent reason at all. Having crashed the car in several more stages, Niki didn't lose optimism. To be honest, from time to time he still reached the finish line in places from 2nd to 6th. He also managed to win, which was very good for the then dance field in Formula 3, where people like James Hunt drove. On September 5, 1970, Jochen Rindt died in Monza. The same day could have become the date of death of a known driver from Austria. Lauda took part in race in Zolder, 3rd lap, had a low awareness accident somewhere on the track. The race drew up the hill in formation at a speed of 210 km per hour, and then an ambulance appeared right in front of them at a speed of 50 km per hour. The first 3 riders were able to squeeze through on the right. James Hunt was among them. Then someone else wanted to go around on the right, but he couldn't do it. He turned around and started circling. Niki wanted to dodge to the left, but that same spinning car was already in his trajectory. They collided. The next car crashed into Lauda at a speed of under 200 km per hour. All this happened in the middle of the track. Yellow flags appeared, while behind the hill the next group of drivers flashed without slowing down. But everything ended well, only one of them touched the nose of the car, after which Niki jumped out of the car and ran away. This event on the day of Jochen Rindt's death becomes the pinnacle of the 3rd season, which became a real anti-season. Then Niki began to develop one of his main talents: thinking, analyzing, setting goals for himself.
Result: yes, I still want to race, but I don't want to be a crazy person in the field with 24 other crazy people. The only logical solution was to immediately end Formula 3 and move to the next racing class. Then it was Formula 2, but this would require a huge financial injection, which meant doubling the stakes without winning anything yet.
In the early 70s, something that is now taken for granted appeared: the driver buying a seat in the cockpit. This was the flip side of the new professionalism in motorsport. There was more money, everything became bigger, more complex, more expensive. Big teams could only afford one driver and would rent out a second cockpit to anyone who was willing to pay. March was one of the most exciting teams in Formula 2 back then. They had young superstar Ronnie Peterson as their number 1, so they didn't need a really good co-driver and they were willing to take someone for the money. Niki signed the contract before he actually had any money. It was about $500,000 shillings. He managed to get an advertising contract with the First Austrian Savings Bank. And, of course, it cannot be denied that the name Lauda wasn't useless there. It must be understood that the surname Lauda at the time was Akin the Lannisters from Game of Thrones. Everyone thought they were laying golden eggs. And Niki was just like Tyrion, who didn't want to study school science, gone to the bank only to borrow money, and most importantly, engaged in such a hopeless, dangerous, and generally uneconomical activity as auto racing. 1971 was an ordinary year, that is an average year. Niki learned a lot from Peterson, but by the end of the season he still had 2/3 of his debt paid off and needed more money to buy his place in 1972. For that matter, this time Lauda wanted a combined Formula 2 and Formula 1 deal with March. The team, in general, was pleased with him, but not enough to let him ride for free, or, moreover, pay him something. They demanded 2.5 million shillings, to which Niki said that is not a big deal. As I have already said, he gave the impression of a young man who could arrange anything. In general, there were no signs of trouble. The band was satisfied with Niki's promotional value, and another loan was possible. The CEO agreed. Niki flew to England, signed a contract with March, returned back and learned that the bank board of directors had rejected his project. However, upon return to Austria, Niki learned that he has already been denied an approved loan. It turned out that Niki's grandfather decided to cool his grandson down and ask his friend for a small favor. Of course, Niki was furious, called his grandfather, and having heard the phrase, Lauda's name should be in the economic section of the newspaper, not in the sports section, politely sent him to some mother.
So then I went to see my grandfather. I said, why did you turn this thing down? Because I don't want you to race. I want you to be in our business, and I want you to see the Lauda name on the economy side of the newspapers, not on the sports side. This is the way it is. I think it's unfair because I work with these people long, and I think because you're my grandfather, you could have said yes. You said no, so now I have nothing. So, and this was then the end of my relation with my grandfather anyway.
Almost everyone learned about the difficult financial situation of the young racer, but he was still lucky. Nick headed to Raiffeisenbank, where he was lucky enough to meet the director, Karl-Heinz Ertel. He helped take out a loan of 2.5 million shillings, and his sponsorship took on the interest payments and the necessary insurance. Niki brought this money to March and was thus left without cash and with 2.5 million in debts. The most interesting thing is that it didn't bother him at all. Yep, Niki needed the money, a lot of money. Never before he competed in so many races in one season as in 1972. Formula 1, Formula 2, Touring Car Championship and long-distance racing, a total of 30 races. And yet it was a terrible year, because the most important car, the March of Formula 1, turned out to be an utter failure of design. This thing was called the 721X. It was considered an evolutionary miracle machine. It had a gearbox in front of the differential, and March was looking at it as the new championship weapon warfare of Ronnie Peterson. In Jarama, a couple of days before the Spanish Grand Prix, the 721X was tested for the first time. Of course, only Ronnie Peterson was allowed to drive. He was immediately almost as fast as Jackie Stewart in the Tyrrell. And Stewart was the measure of everything. There was a lot of excitement in the March team, and no one was willing to take into account that Stewart had been battling damper problems for 2 days. So his lap times weren't much to write home about. The next day, Niki finally got the chance to drive the new car, and it turned out to be uncontrollable. The car was terribly aggressive, with a particularly unstable rear part. Lauda was completely unable to handle the thing, and his lap times were much worse than Peterson's. But Lauda's weak results were attributed to inexperience and not to the fact that the car was trash. The team realized this only towards the middle of the season, when it was already too late. Niki learned a harsh but very important life lesson. Firstly, you should rely more on your sense of technology. Secondly, that there are designers who, full of enthusiasm, can go in the wrong direction. And thirdly, that there are famous racers who would rather try to squeeze the last out of a failed car, but not to explain to the engineers why it's bad and how it could be made better. Peterson abandoned the sinking ship and went to Lotus, but Niki faced the prospect of triple bankruptcy, with no prospect for a new contract.
As I drove from Bicester from these last talks with March, I thought about suicide for the first and last time in my life. I knew that at such a kilometer, there was a T-shaped intersection, and I just needed to leave my foot on the gas pedal, and there would be a very solid wall there. But I thought about it in time. An ordinary profession is not the answer. I have no education. I have learned nothing. I will feel miserable, and it will take me an infinitely long time to pay off my debts, perhaps 20, 30 years. And if you carefully calculate the difference between accrued interest and earnings, then you get all 40. That is, I must continue to race for the same reasons as before. This is the only future I imagine and understand. But Project 1973 had to take place without cash. This was clear from the very beginning. Another loan was impossible.
had some connection with Lewis Stanley, the boss of the English team BRM. The team was average, with good engineers and impressive but complex 12-cylinder engine. The best times for BRM were clearly in the 60s and moreover in the first half of the decade. In 1962, Graham Hill became BRM champion, and this laid the foundation for the team's legendary status. Niki was invited to take tests at Paul Ricard, and they went very well. Lauda turned out to be slightly faster than the car driver Chopin. In addition, Niki became friends with the team's number one, Clay Regazzoni, during these tests. However, money was again needed to sign a new contract. All Niki managed to agree on was to split the required amount into several parts. The Austrian's plan was simple. He had already put himself in debt for the next 30 years. What will change if he becomes a debtor? Niki planned to become a Formula One star and renegotiate Niki Lauda's contract. But the first question is, wasn't it crazy to even get into a race car under such pressure?
When asked whether it was crazy to even get into a race car under such pressure, from today's point of view, I would no doubt answer. Yes, it was simply crazy to mix all these situations and become addicted to it. However, it did not have any effect on the actual driving. When you get into the car, you don't think about money. At that time, I cared as little about my debts as I did a couple of years later about the fantastic sums I was earning. Money, whether debit or credit, did not change my driving style.
The 1973 season was so-so for all three cars, with one fourth place being Belda's best result in 15 races. However, Niki managed to become fifth once. This was in Zolder, the first 2 points in his life. The BRM cars were already well on their way to the technical decline, after which they also never won a single race and soon completely disappeared. Management was forced to save money. The lack of understanding of the situation on the part of this leader, Lewis Stanley, only aggravated all this. He just wasn't a racing person. He liked feeling like a boss. Stanley's wife was the sister of Arthur Owen, who owned the team, and since he was a religious man and didn't work on Sunday, back in the late 50s he began sending his new relative in the races. So, Lewis Stanley became the de facto leader of the team. But let's return to our hero at the Monaco Grand Prix. In practice, he was the fastest of the BRM drivers, 6th, and spent 25 laps in 3rd place, behind Jackie Stewart and Emerson Fittipaldi. Then the gearbox broke, but it was still his race. This was the finest hour that allowed Lauda, who by that time was already completely broke, to remain in Formula One. In the evening, Stanley offered Niki to freeze the remaining payments and make him a paid driver if he tied himself to BRM for another 2 years. Niki, who was broke, had no choice and agreed. That day, sitting in front of the TV and the Ferrari drew attention to Niki. He became fully confident that he wanted to get him when Niki was the fastest man in the field in rainy practice at Zandvoort. Zandvoort 1973 was a tragic race where Roger Williamson was shown slowly burning to death on TV. There has been a lot of misunderstanding around this accident, and I propose to leave this point out for now. That July 1973, it finally became clear to Enzo Ferrari that he wanted Niki Lauda, and he sent ambassadors. Of course, Lauda wanted to go to Ferrari. He wanted to get rid of BRM, which, however, he completely owned for another 2 years. There were enough reasons to leave the team. Lewis Stanley was late in paying his due fee. It was known that any payments to BRM were carried out with great difficulty. Secondly, you can buy yourself out of any contract if you pay, and Ferrari was ready to provide money to pay the penalty. Frankfurt, the entire BRM team was so disheartened and had no idea what to do next from the technical point of view that it became clear that sunset was just around the corner. Of course, Stanley was very offended by Lauda, and this is not surprising, but one way or another, his team soon disappeared along with all memories of the heroic 60s. Ferrari is the dream team for most drivers. It seems that by 74 season hadn't won a title for 10 years. John Surtees became world champion driving a Ferrari in 1964. Since then, Ferrari has averaged one race win per season. In 1973, the team was completely in doldrums. Niki was young and promising, and so in the fall of 1973, Lauda came to Italy.
The first time in Fiorano with a Ferrari. Piero Ferrari's son was there as an interpreter because I couldn't speak Italian. And the old man said to Piero, ask him how the car is. And I said, the car is understeers like hell, doesn't work, in my normal, straightforward language. And Piero said, you can't say the car is Why? It is I said in English. The old man was listening. And I can't say this to my father. And I tell him, the car is no good. Tell him no good, if this is a better word. Niki said, the car is no good. This little bit I understood. And then the old man said, what did he say? A Ferrari is no good? Yes, it's I said even then, to him direct. And then nothing happened for 30 seconds, and it was the longest 30 seconds of my life. And then he said, okay, what is it understeers? Front end is wrong, doesn't turn in. The BRM I drove was a perfect handling car, turned in, quick out, quick in. Engine was no good, but this was a good car. This is not a good car.
And they ordered Ferrari to make all the necessary changes that Niki asked for, in turn giving Niki an ultimatum. If in a week you aren't faster by a second, you will be kicked out of the team. Niki and Mario spent the next week together, working almost around the clock on the car. Luckily, Ferrari is already very far along in his work on the new front suspension with a low roll center. And indeed, the new front axle was so much better that Niki easily saved his own skin for the first, but not the last time in Ferrari. In fact, it was difficult to do business with Enzo, because for all members of the factory he was the banner, the boss, whose word was something like law. Part of the legend was also his refusal to attend races, and generally to leave the Modena-Maranello area, with rare exceptions. Since he also didn't receive many guests, he was in his own isolated world, in which he was completely dependent on the information of his lackeys and newspaper reports. Most of the employees were afraid to talk to Enzo, and bringing him disappointing news was akin to execution, so the blame was placed on the races, on the mechanics, on the circumstances, on the weather. But they were unable to admit the simple fact that the car was far from ideal. Those close to him protected their patriarch, following the principle, a beautiful lie is better than a bad truth. Niki wasn't interested in anyone's historical achievements, and certainly in the cult of Enzo Ferrari. It wasn't for racers.
I did not address him as a boss with respect in a businesslike manner. When I needed to talk to him, I knocked on the door and entered. I have to admit, it was a courageous show. A strict dark blue office. On the wall, there is a large canvas with a portrait of his deceased son, in front of whom, as a rule, candles were burning. There's a decrepit president at the table. If you enter here with apprehension, then you leave even more depressed, oppressed by this great silence. But if you talk to him, naturally, everything went fine. The old man was not only a great personality, but also a good, benevolent person. I never had any difficulty in conversations with him. Difficulties began only when I left this office and his advisors entered.
Yeah, Ferrari could have become world champions in 1974, but first Niki missed all his chances. Then in the final fight at the final two overseas Grand Prix, Rigazzoni's technique failed. By the end of the season, Lauda was sincerely trying to help Clay in his fight for the championship, but he didn't succeed here either. However, even then the nickname calculator began to stick to Niki. Lauda conducted the race very prudently, often attacking only when it was really necessary. But if it didn't work out, then he would quietly finish somewhere on the podium. But in general, even despite their prudence, there were many problems. But it was the season that laid the foundation for Ferrari's future success.
My life changed in the shortest possible time in every way. The biggest difference was the appearance of popularity. Already, both victories in '74 were enough for everyone in Austria. The Germans adopted me in some way, and the Italians multiplied Lauda by Ferrari. From the very beginning, when fame began, it meant little to me, and changed me only in the sense that in my private life, I tried to go more and more into a reserve, a very narrow circle of friends, strictly defined restaurants, more stay indoors, a new love. Flying fit well with this. What initially interested me only as a technical problem acquired practical significance. A small private aircraft could greatly shorten at least the Salzburg, Modena, Salzburg route. I started taking lessons and bought a Cessna Golden Eagle, which I initially hired a pilot to fly. One way or another, I could afford it. The salary at Ferrari was enormous compared to my previous situation, and by today's standards, ridiculous. And for my performances in touring car racing BMW Alpina, I received decent fees.
And in 1975, a miracle appeared, the Ferrari 312T, a racing monument to Fornieri, the pearl among racing cars. At first, the season didn't start very well for Lauda. In the first 4 races, he couldn't rise above 5th place. But starting from Monaco, Niki controls the situation. A golden series followed. Monaco, Zolder, Understow, victory in the Castle. Also winning the last race of the season, the US Grand Prix, Niki Lauda became the world champion for the first time. Lauda was very calculating in everything, a walking calculator. That's why we call him that. He didn't like to spend money and rarely give gifts. He wore the clothes provided by his sponsors. Moreover, he usually dressed rather tastelessly. This didn't add to his popularity. In Italy, having won the title in 1975, he decided to give the Verge to his team as gift. In general, '75 became a landmark year for Niki not only because of the title. 2 more very important events took place, which in fact radically turned the race's life upside down. First, Lauda secretly married his longtime lover Marilyn in Ibiza. Secondly, at the end of the season, Niki's main friend and support Luca Montezemolo leaves the team. His career couldn't linger for long at the first step, the work of a racing director. Luca was invited closer to the heart of the power of the Fiat empire. The official change of job was formalized only in '78, but in fact his role as Enzo Ferrari right hand came to know at the end of '75. He still showed up occasionally at races, but was no longer involved in team's affairs. It was a difficult moment, from which in fact we can begin counting the problems that Niki had with the team in the future. His successor, Daniele Audetto, was a vain guy, caught up in car intrigues, neurotic and, in general, fussy as everyone else at Ferrari. The calm, intelligent man in the shadow of the commendatory was immediately missed. The 1976 racing season started fantastically, with Ferrari smashing everyone. Looking back, we can say that everything was too smooth. Niki Lauda, the new world champion, began the season as an undisputed favorite. Niki won the first 2 races, Rigazzoni won the third.
And then there was a strange accident with a tractor. I wanted to demolish a mound on my front lawn, and in the process, I overturned my tractor. A couple of centimeters were not enough, and I would have been killed or crushed. In any case, I was firmly compacted into the ground. I only escaped with 2 broken ribs, which was actually a good result for this kind of accident, with a tractor weighing 1.8 tons. But the pain was hellish. Plus, the media jumped on this case. Of course, a Formula One world champion having a tractor accident is definitely a lucrative topic.
If you can't please the Italian press for Ferrari, you're worthless. The press can make a god out of you, but do something stupid and they will bring you down from Olympus. Naturally, astute journalists quickly caught the wind of everything and began to spread rumors in the press that Lauda would be replaced by the young Italian Flamini. For that matter, according to the press, Ferrari should have been driven only by Italians. For Flamini, there was no other chance to prove himself in big prizes. Already an Italian and now a blessed Ferrari seems to be free. Niki took this as a personal insult. Just yesterday he was a champion, a star, a hope of Ferrari, and now he was lying around with broken ribs, not even having the opportunity to tell the management that he would be ready. A radio reporter from Salzburg comes to Niki and brought him a man named Willi Dungl. He was a massage therapist, a wonderful healer, a guru, a nutritionist, an important person associated with the sensational success of Austrian ski jumpers. The first meeting between Niki and the miracle healer didn't go well. Willi just glanced at Niki and said, "I can't do anything at all here. If you want something from me, you should take care of your arrival in Vienna." Meanwhile, panic broke out at Ferrari, which stressed Lauda. So with increasing pain, nevertheless, he still went to Vienna to see the wonderful miracle healer and introduce himself to Willi Dungl.
Dungl told me that by making the effort for this trip to Vienna, I, so to speak, qualified for his help, since until now he considered me to be a very arrogant athlete who does not take into account his own body. If I clearly express my will to do something for my body, starting today, he would start working with me. From that moment on, Dungl became one of the most important people for me and for my profession. He is invincible. He is a genius. His knowledge, instinct, delicacy, his methods. I simply cannot imagine that there is a second person on earth who can do as much. He rediscovered my body, and at the age of 36, I am in better shape than I was at 26. He led me to change my diet and habits and find explanations for everything that I could actually understand. In addition, he is one of the leaders in grumbling in the world.
Then, in May 1976, Dungl was actually able to reinstate Niki for Jarama race. However, the whole action was carried out at the limit. Everything could very easily go wrong. During a tough maneuver in duel with James Hunt, a broken rib popped out and could have punctured a lung, and the pain was on the other side of what was endured. The Willi's massage after the race to set rib back was pure magic. Second place in Jarama meant precious 6 points, and altogether was the first feeling of the impending chaos in Niki's life and in Ferrari. Ferrari and Lauda continued to dominate. Meanwhile, the commentator, waiting perhaps on the one hand to make amends for the feeling of guilt that had arisen and in no way wanted to lose the goose that lays the golden eggs, decided to take an unprecedented step for himself. He always signed new contracts with drivers quite late, in August, so they didn't have the opportunity to escape to another team. In this way, prices were reduced and the old man considered himself a smart tactician. Everything was different this time. Niki could be signed by absolutely any team at that moment, easily kicking out any of the current drivers, and his value as an asset was very high and would greatly help in negotiation with potential sponsors. In January, Ferrari needed a new contract with the Austrian, and 2 days after the race at Brands Hatch, Niki Lauda and Enzo Ferrari sat down at the table and held the famous negotiation described in detail by Niki Lauda.
At one point, he asks what I think about money. How much will I require? I tell him the amount in shillings. So many millions of shillings. He is silent, gets up, goes to the phone, calls the accountant Della Casa, and asks him, how many millions of shillings will the transfer be? He waits for an answer, hangs up, comes back, and calmly sits down opposite me. Then he starts yelling, as I have never heard in my life. He screams as if on a spit. Impudence, disgusting. What am I allowing myself? I'm crazy. We have nothing more to talk about. We're not on the same path. And when he takes a breath, Piero quickly translates the last curse. Translation is a useful padding in such negotiations. Curse words become more abstract. I tell Piero, translate for him. If we are not on the same path, then I can fly home. Piero tells me to stay seated. This goes on for a while. Finally, I say Ferrari should make a counteroffer. No, says the old man. He only wants happy riders on his team. And his counter offer won't make me happy. Okay, then I can actually go home. Since my proposal is not accepted and a counter proposal is not made, then we have no chance. Finally, he makes an offer, a good quarter lower than my demands, already in lira. I get angry and tell Piero, explain to him that his manager has already offered me a couple of million lar more. Is he trying to fool me? My anger is not feigned. I lose respect because we are equal partners. He wants to buy my abilities, and they cost so much. What? The old man shouts. Is this true about Audetto? Yes, I say. Call him. He calls Audetto and asks him if the amount mentioned is correct. Yes, says Audetto. He offered that much. Then Ferrari tells me, well, if one of my crazy employees offered that much, then he will have to agree. But this is my last offer. He shouts at me, roars like a bull. I show goodwill and calmly lower the bar by a percentage. In response to this, he calms down and says that I am shameless. This is unheard of. He's had enough. I've crossed all boundaries. He has nerves. I want him dead. I ask Piero to translate that Ferrari would never have become a champion without me. Piero, I can't translate this. I won't do it. I tell him not to be a coward and to calmly translate, and quickly. Piero gathers his courage and translates. Blushing, the old man starts screaming again. He walks back and forth for an hour until he asks how much I demand. I'm going down another 4%. That's my last offer. Then he says, okay, Jew. Since insulting is already included in my fee, the old man immediately becomes a charming interlocutor. The most pleasant interlocutor you can imagine.
Next was the stage at the Nürburgring. Even those who aren't particularly familiar with the history of the motorsport know what happened in Germany at the Nürburgring. It started to rain on Saturday, and the starting positions were formed based on the results of Friday's races. Niki Lauda, remembering the danger of the track, tried to raise the issue of cancelling the race. But the margin of just one vote decided the fate of the stage not in his favor. Hunt and Lauda again started from the first line. On suitable asphalt, almost everyone started on rain tires, and after the first lap, the participants went to the pits for slicks. Having lost little more time at the pit stop, Lauda immediately began to attack, and in the middle of the second lap, having driven onto the curb at the exit of the Bergmerk turn, his car went off the track straight into the bump stop. Having turned out the gas tank, the car instantly bursts into flames. Guy Edwards will dodge the burning Ferrari, but Langer and Ertl, who are following, won't be able to avoid the collision with the burning car. All three rushed to Lauda's aid. Arturo Merzario also stopped nearby. He will unfasten his seatbelts in the flames, after which Niki will be removed from the flaming car. Lauda was conscious, but the situation was aggravated by the fact that at the time of the accident his helmet went off, and the Austrian received serious burns to his face and head. In addition to the burns, Lauda lungs were filled with caustic combustion products. The ambulance arrives and Niki is loaded into the car. The count went literally for a minute. Then a long struggle for Lauda's life follows. Ventilation, rehabilitation, the fight for return just 2 stages after the ill-fated accident. His own memories on that accident are very scarce. And this is very good because it didn't haunt him all his life, didn't appear in his dreams, and didn't interfere.
My last memory of the race was changing the tires from rain to slicks and leaving the pits. Next memory, the sound of a helicopter. Then I'm lying in bed. I'm tired. I want to sleep. I don't know anything. It's going to end soon. Only on the 4th day it became clear that I would live. Severe lung and blood damage occurred due to inhalation of gasoline vapors. The burns themselves, on the face, head and hands, were not life-threatening, but the scars still remain.
The only time the association associated with how Niki fought for his life was released in 1984 in Ibiza. One mutual friend of Niki and Marlene left to join at their house. Niki had always kept his distance from any kind of drugs, but for some reason, just in the mood, he and Marlene smoked this cigarette.
I was lying on the sofa and my body felt so heavy that I couldn't move at all. It was wonderful to lie there so stupidly, with your tongue hanging out of your mouth. Suddenly, I realized, Nürburgring Hospital, that's how it was. I'm falling into a hole. On my back, turning over, I fall into a huge hole. And it will be very good there. Everything will end.
There has been no official statement regarding the cause of the accident. Ferrari didn't speak out. The only version remains with Niki's chief mechanic, Romano Cuoghi. He believes that the right trailing arm of the suspension was torn out at the back of the engine. The engine is a low-burning element and is connected to the wheel suspension by a magnesium part. If that part, the trailing arm, breaks, the rear wheel will lose support, spin out and begin to affect the steering of the car. The result will be exactly the effect that will lead to an expected deviation to the right. There had been similar breakdowns at Ferrari before. Cuoghi knew this for sure. "33 days after the accident, having lost 12 points of his championship lead over James Hunt, Niki returns to work. Ferrari were embarrassed. Outwardly, Enzo Ferrari and the entire company fully supported their slightly burned champion, but inside there was a perfect uncertainty, instead of trust, maneuvering. And although Niki brought Ferrari 4th place in Monza, it wasn't easy at all for him.
Both then and later, I said that I quickly overcame my fear. It was a lie, but it would be stupid to tell your opponents about your weakness. In Monza, I was frozen with fear. It was so bad at Friday practice that I pulled out at the first opportunity. But for now, I had to pretend to be a hero in order to gain time and come to my senses. After analyzing this day, I reprogrammed Saturday's training. Less pressure, relax, go slower. That's what I did. I started slower, then faster and faster, and suddenly I found myself the fastest Ferrari driver, faster than Regazzoni and the newcomer to the team. With this, I proved in practice what I had already understood mentally. I could drive the same way as before the accident. I suppressed my fear so much that I even took 4th place in Monza. Not bad under such circumstances. The Ferrari team still supported me verbally, but from within these gentlemen could not understand at all how to treat a champion who, with a disfigured face, tried to pretend that everything was normal. Chaos. Complete chaos. Instead of reducing the pressure on me, they increased it by bringing Carlos into the team. He was the worst kind of surly, cold, or icy type, and we always couldn't stand each other. I fought like a lion not to go under, physically and mentally. In Canada, I had some kind of stupid breakdown. In Watkins Glen, I took third place. Hunt won both races. I came to the last stage with 3 points of advantage. Fuji, not far from Tokyo.
Everything had to be decided in Japan, at the foot of Fuji, and in Japan there was rain. Not just rain, downpour. Almost everyone was sure that the race would be cancelled, but the broadcast, the money, the battle for the title. Cancelling this means the loss of huge sums for the organizers. It was quickly getting dark on the track, and the race really would have to be cancelled because the drivers simply wouldn't have seen each other, the spectators wouldn't have seen the cars on the track, and TV viewers wouldn't have seen anything either. And so, about an hour and a half, the start was given. Hunt confidently took the lead. Lauda, whose vision was already poor after the accident, began to lose ground, and after the second lap, Niki decided to end the race altogether. "I have no intention of committing suicide, at least not a second time," the Austrian said and got out of the car. In this situation, Enzo Ferrari didn't show his best side. He reacted like any other team chef whose prey had escaped. He showed nothing great of warfare of Ferrari. Officially, he agreed with Niki's point of view, but the phone conversation that Niki had with him at the Tokyo airport was vacuous and heartless. Enzo didn't want to know how his driver felt. He only trusted the stupid newspapers that wrote, "Lauda is covered, he is afraid, Lauda is blown away, Lauda is done." As soon as Niki returned to Europe, Enzo Ferrari called him and offered the team manager position. He chose the safest route, not to let Lauda race and not to give him to any other team. He would be disgraced if a year later he started winning on another team. It probably seemed like a very smart tactic to him at this point.
As soon as I realized this, I ran to my car and brought the contract that we signed before the Nürburgring. I put the contract on the table and asked, "What about this? Shall we forget?" and theatrically described to the old man his prospects in the McLaren team. Internally, at that time, I had already broken up with Ferrari, both with the boss and with most of his hangers.
Niki was kicked out of the room, several people were called, and a big council began. Then they let him in again and announced that he would remain a racer, but Reutemann would be number one. The life of any other world champion would have been over, but not for Niki. This is nonsense, because the riders will have the same technique one way or another. Who will become the first or second number will have become clear automatically, so Lauda didn't worry about Mr. Reutemann. Auto racing is difficult to win, but not to lose is often even more difficult. 1977 was a difficult year. First, Niki had to defeat Reutemann and regain leadership in the team. By the third race in South Africa, he had more or less succeeded and was able to again devote all his energy to technical development. But Ferrari were no longer the fastest cars. They only had 2 pole positions in all season. The main rivals were Hunt, McLaren, Andretti Lotus, and Scheckter, Wolf. Niki himself called the next race the best in his career, his best win. As he later said, he deliberately held the car in the training and qualifying so as not to reveal his cards. At the first stage of the season in South Africa, the Austrian scored perhaps the most important victory in his life. Damaging the oil pipeline with the wreckage of Shadow Tom Price, Lauda was able to contain all of Scheckter's attacks and finish first. The Austrian proved to all detractors that he can still win races. At the hotel, a telegram from Enzo was already waiting for Lauda. "You are still the same as before, even better than before." Lauda was again held in high esteem. Lauda again became Ferrari's number one. Only Ferrari wasn't number one at all. That year was Lotus with its wing car concept, Renault with a new turbo engine, and finally McLaren with the super-fast James Hunt at the wheel. I talked about the technological races of the time in my previous video, so I won't go into detail now. That season, Lauda was back again, a calculator, stubbornly collecting points wherever it's possible. Over the entire season, Niki had only 3 victories. He was regularly inferior to his rivals in speed, but outplayed them with phenomenal reliability. It was Niki Lauda's caring attitude towards his equipment, while Hunt regularly got into accidents and killed his own car. Niki was a real collector, and already 2 races before the end of the championship, becoming 4th at Watkins Glen, he becomes a 2-time world champion. But despite this, the atmosphere in the team itself was tense to the limit. Lauda naturally didn't forget the pre-season insults. He clearly understood that he could bury his chances for the title if he just announced his resignation. At the same time, he was fed up with Ferrari. The internal struggle, disputes over the modernization of the car, it was truly difficult and nerve-wracking. Niki understood that there was simply no future at Ferrari for him, and in the middle of the season he secretly negotiated with Bernie. Yeah, with the same Bernie Ecclestone, and signed a contract to perform for his team.
At Zandvoort, the 13th of the 17 rounds of the season, everything was decided. I signed a contract with Bernie Ecclestone and Brabham. This event had to be kept in the strictest confidence. Otherwise, I would have jeopardized my excellent chances at the title at Ferrari. Once again, the commendator was greedy and wanted to conclude an agreement with me as early as possible, so I had to constantly come up with some stupid excuses to avoid negotiations. I was happy when I left. As soon as I became the new world champion, I no longer wanted to endure this ridiculously tense atmosphere and refused to start in Canada and Japan. Be that as it may, I gave way to a worthy heir. This was a really hard blow for Enzo Ferrari. And then he spoke very unflatteringly about me. As for me, that chapter is over. My anger has subsided, and what remains is the fact that Enzo Ferrari made my first appearance in a leading team possible. 15 victories, 12 second and 5 third places remained. 23 pole positions, 5,301 leading kilometers in Formula One remained. 248 points and 2 championship titles remained. A great love for Italy, and much of what can be called Italy, and much of what can be called Italian remained.
Over time, youthful fervor faded, and Niki's attitude towards Enzo changed dramatically.
Looking backwards, it was a big mistake. I should have stayed. I should have asked him the same amount of money what Bernie paid me. I would have been more successful. But at the time, it was for me the right decision, even if it was wrong, because of all this experience after the accident, how difficult was it to get his support back. He put right the money in the car, made me a number 2, then I won again the championship. So in all this, I didn't want to forget. I had in the back of my mind. But looking backward, it was wrong to leave him.
At the beginning of the video, I asked you a question. What are you willing to do for your dream? And now I want to ask, what if the path to your dream is more intense than the dream itself? What happens when you reach it? The move to the English team was beneficial for Niki. Bernie Ecclestone and designer Gordon Murray behaved freely, at least much freer than any Ferrari man could behave. There was neither this monstrous compulsion to succeed, no pressure from the press. Everything was more normal. Gordon Murray was a technician who said hello in the morning and got to work without pep talks. Where's the catch, you ask? Yeah, Gordon Murray could do everything. He couldn't only do one thing: choose the engine for his car. Powerful but incredibly unreliable 12-cylinder from Alfa Romeo. Cars often didn't make it to the finish line because some oil lines were turned off or some other stupid thing happened. The confrontation between Alfa technical specialists Carlo Kitty and Gordon Murray was also a big feature. The only truly bright event was the car developed by Gordon Murray, a vacuum cleaner. Since flexible aerodynamics were already prohibited then, he came up with a great excuse. To develop the idea, he decided to use one propeller, but a truly gigantic in size, more than half a meter in diameter. Mounted vertically, the fan was directly connected to the gearbox input shaft. It turned out that in addition to the task for which it was actually created, the unit also performed one more task. It creates a vacuum under the bottom and suctions the car to the asphalt. A car equipped with the fan turned out to be extremely difficult to drive. Nevertheless, the advantages of the design turned out to be more significant than the disadvantages, and Lauda won the first race on the BT-46B.
It was clear that our competitors had no chance against us. Even the magnificent Lotus, which had super drivers, Andretti and Peterson, the vacuum cleaner cars, were ready in time for the Swedish Grand Prix in Anderstorp, and our biggest concern was not to show their obvious superiority, otherwise it would be very awkward. In practice, John Watson and I rode with full tanks and did everything we could to avoid pole position. There was nothing to misconstrue about the victory, but sports authorities subsequently banned fans. Technical development, although it went in the same direction, increasing downforce, but in small steps and with careful methods.
Bernie Ecclestone was already the main puppeteer of Formula One and was doing big politics. He took care of his own team on a residual basis, and Lotus was invincible then. Niki won the second race in Monza only because Andretti received a penalty minute for a false start. In other cases, it was too painful to follow or get off due to problems with Alfa engines. Things got even worse in 1979, with Lauda only finishing twice and his new teammate Nelson Piquet only finishing in the points once. 79 was marked by the excellence of Ferrari, their drivers Scheckter and Villeneuve, and then outstanding Michelin tires.
People asked me then whether I was annoyed that Ferrari could win without Lauda. To this, I can only answer: everything that happens in the team after me is indifferent to me, and why shouldn't Ferrari rise to the top again? This is just logical.
In 1979, Niki and Marlene's son Lucas was born in Salzburg. By this time, Marlene had long isolated herself from racing. It's safe to say that she hated it, and that never changed. Marlene considered racing stupid and everyone who had anything to do with it stupid, and she made no exception for Niki in this regard.
I myself always gave priority to my egoism and convinced myself that family was one thing and racing was another. And the birth of a son did not change anything in this sense. However, then in the middle of 1979, racing became a little boring for me, and I began to think about my situation from many sides. To add some tension again, I considered it advisable to now ask for an incredibly large amount of money, a record amount for those years. Already at the beginning of the summer, Bernie and I began negotiations. I said $2 million and not a cent less. He took me for a crazy person, for a lawless person, thought it was a joke, got angry, then calmed down and began talking to me like a sick horse, and I kept repeating, $2 million.
The case dragged on for 4 months. Of course, Ecclestone was as before very interested in Niki, and since the issue of switching to a Cosworth engine had already been resolved, Lauda was also important to him as a test driver. In addition, the main sponsor Parmalat liked Niki, so the situation was favorable to get a fantastic contract for 1980. Everything worsened by autumn. Bernie approached Niki many times about the contract, but he remained stubborn. And eventually Bernie had to agree to Lauda's terms and sign the contract. In Italy, in Parma, the agreement was officially signed, and already at the moment Niki noticed that he had run out of breath. As soon as he defeated Bernie, the whole matter ceased to interest to him, and $2 million in fact didn't improve the situation much. At the end of September at the Canadian Grand Prix, Brabham competed for the first time with 8-cylinder Cosworth, which was then equipped with all teams except Ferrari and Renault. The car looked great. Curtin Murray created the hit of the decade. And it would seem, what else does a champion need? A competitive car, an excellent contract, a high fee. But Niki didn't experience any emotions.
I'm running a Cosworth. It's a strange feeling. I feel new vibrations in the sacrum, an unpleasant tickling, a couple of presses on the gas pedal when leaving the pits. The noises are completely different, somehow more insipid and dull. Everything is more boring and slow. Nothing pleasant. 12 cylinders cannot be replaced by anything. First of all, in terms of sensations, suddenly the curtain falls. And I can only think of one thing. You are out of place at all. Do something else. Now. The opposing voice in me says, calmly, don't panic, ride a little more. Yes, drive further. This will buy time. Perhaps you need to adjust something in the car, and then your thoughts will become different. I torture myself for a quarter of an hour. I really ask them to adjust some little things in the pits. I go out again and understand. I can't anymore. That's it. It's over. Nothing will work out further. I drive back into the pits. Come out. Say that I need to bleed the brake and clutch drives and go to Bernie. I need to talk to you. I can't do it anymore, and I don't want to. I'm quitting.
Ecclestone quickly understood everything. The huge contract for 1980 was cancelled. Bernie completely agreed with Niki. If someone wants to get involved, they should do it right away, and they shouldn't be stopped. He said, this is a big and right decision.
Bernie Ecclestone defended me from journalists. You need peace now, and I will give you as much time as you need to leave Montreal. Only a very few journalists knew the background and found me at the hotel. The main idea of my statement is that I don't want to drive stupidly in circles anymore. I went to a hotel in Long Beach, where no one knew me. It was wonderful. All I was interested in now was flying.
The Force seemed to stop. The race went on as usual. Nelson Piquet fought for the title with the drivers of Frank Williams. Ron Dennis, with the support of a huge tobacco giant, gained control of the legendary McLaren team. But Niki wasn't at all interested in racing. Even TV broadcasts seemed too boring to him. He completely lost interest in it. Lauda took a breath from racing and worked on a new project in his life, the Lauda Airline. To say that things weren't easy is to say nothing. From the very beginning, since its opening in '78, the airline experienced enormous political difficulties. The thing is that Austrian Airlines was a monopoly of the country, receiving government support, unlimited resources, and exclusive contracts. Though this company decided that it didn't need competitors in the market, even such a small company as Lauda Airline. However, in the end, the short-sighted company was precisely the reason that Lauda Air became a full-fledged project. Niki purchased 2 small airplanes, but the company suffered catastrophic losses. In 1981, Niki and Marlene's second son, Matthias, was born. In a sense, it didn't change much. The family remained in Salzburg. Niki worked in Vienna. It was a strange transition period and seemed like something was going to happen. And it happened. The distaste for television coverage of Formula One race gradually subsided. and in summer of 1981, Niki accepted the invitation from Austrian television to act as a second commentator next to Heinz Prüller. Here I also need to say a few words about Ron Dennis. He really wanted to be the one who would return Niki to Formula One. Only after becoming the team leader, he began persistently calling Lauda a couple of times a month and saying that he was really looking forward to his return. He and the tobacco giant needed the big name of the champion. So, from the commentary booth, the view down to the starting field seemed quite pleasant to Niki. It smelled good again. For the first time in a long time, he liked it. Without thinking twice, Lauda decided to try and dial Ron's number. They agreed to conduct close tests in Donington Park on September 16, 1981. A wonderful day in Donington. There were Ron Dennis, John Watson, a couple of mechanics, an ambulance, firefighters, and no journalists. They really managed to keep the secret. Watson had more or less set up the car because everything was new for Niki. A lot had changed in those 2 years. It was the era of wing cars with emphasis on downforce and insane cornering speeds. The first thing became clear that Lauda couldn't even complete 3 laps in a row. There simply wasn't enough strength. During his absence, he completely lost his physical shape. But this didn't bother Niki at all. He knew that Willie would quickly bring him back. After lunch, the car started to handle better. He put in a couple of fast laps and was only a tenth slower than Watson's best time. It became clear, Niki is still fast. Not because of rumors, but by pure chance, the same evening in London Hotel, Frank Williams came to Niki and said that Alan Jones had announced his retirement and would Lauda like to take his place. Niki replied that he needed time to think about the proposal. But there wasn't much to think about. Ron Dennis arranged everything so well that Niki already felt almost at home at McLaren. All that remains was to discuss the terms of the contract.
I demanded more money than anyone had received in motorsport before me. And after a short silence, the argument was presented to me that it was impossible to know whether I would be fast enough after the break. I replied, "My advertising value alone is worth that kind of money. I only ask for $1 for the ride. The rest is for my personality." And indeed, we agreed on this.
Niki received an Austrian racing license. However, it was then discovered that he didn't meet the condition of the newly created super license. It was introduced so that anyone couldn't get behind the wheel of Formula One by simply buying a seat. Inexperienced bad drivers who got in the way and reacted incorrectly have caused many dangerous situations recently. Therefore, now in order to get into Formula One, you had to win several races in Formula 3 or Formula 2 races last year. They made an exception for Lauda and sent a strange form. In it, he had to indicate how long the contract with McLaren was valid and confirm that he had no right to change the team. The super license was issued to Lauda, McLaren. Here it's appropriate to recall that in the 80s there was a war in full swing between the leaders of FISA, Jean-Marie Balestre, and the head of FOCA, Bernie Ecclestone. You can see those events in the detail in the video Battle for Golden Eggs. And despite their war, they had to reconcile for a while and join forces against the racers. After Alain Prost fled to annoying scandal at the end of the 1980s, the Federation decided to protect teams from such embarrassment in the future. To do this, the Federation added the agreement on the issuance of a super license the obligation not to change its team until the expiration of the contract period. At the same time, the designers could still fire their pilots whenever they please. For the time being, this point didn't cause indignation among the riders until Niki returned. Of course, he wasn't ready to sign such a form and convince Pironi. He proclaimed himself president of GPDA that they should do something against this. Pironi called everyone and managed to intercept most of the riders before they sent the signed paper to Paris. On Friday, January 21, 1982, when all teams having gathered in Cagliari had already begun to prepare for the first stage of the World Championship, the South Africa Grand Prix, Niki Lauda and Didier Pironi began to prepare a strike. The conspirators caught their comrades at the entrance to the paddock and put them on the bus. The pilots supported the idea of uprising almost unanimously. The only ones who refused were Jochen Mass and Jackie X. Keke Rosberg, however, agreed to the strike with apparent reluctance. Be that as it may, but having loaded onto the bus, the riders led by Lauda went to Johannesburg, and only Pironi remained on the track for negotiations with FISA. Having dealt with the first outburst of anger, the leaders of Formula 1 finally sat down at the negotiation table with Pironi, but the parties were unable to reach a common denominator for a long time. Meanwhile, the racers themselves were so carried away by their game of conspirators that, out of fear that the team leaders would break their morale one by one, they didn't even go to sleep in their rooms, settling down right in the hotel lobby on the mattresses laid out on the floor. On Saturday at 10 o'clock in the morning, Pironi's long-awaited telephone call rang out at the hotel, signaling the end of the strike. After Formula concession from FIS, Lauda signed his ill-fated license under the same conditions, and by the start of free practice, all the drivers returned to the pits with honor and victory. The race itself went fine for Niki, no more no less. He finished fourth and gained some insight into the enormous physical demands that the winning car races were subjected to. Alan Proust's beautiful victory raised suspicions that Renault had finally mastered the technique. As it soon became clear, it was unfounded. The time hadn't yet come for a turbo, and it certainly hadn't come for Renault. In the second race in Rio, Niki collided with Reutemann. The next stage was Long Beach. De Cesaris took pole and he was in the lead. Then De Cesaris, after overtaking the road about, forgot to change gear and Niki was able to pass him. And now he's already the winner of the race. To return 2 years later and win the third race, that gave Lauda euphoria. Yes, at that time he still couldn't guess what passions will soon boil in the team and what role Ron Dennis would assign to him. Porsche was solely Ron Dennis' idea. Yeah, McLaren urgently needed a turbo engine in Ron's opinion. On the one hand, a logical choice, since Porsche had already experience with turbos from racing. On the other hand, it was quite daring to even turn to a company like Porsche. If they wanted to enter Formula 1, they would have come themselves. Dennis did arrange a dinner with Wolfgang Porsche and Niki Lauda. The negotiation turned out to be failure. Of course, Porsche were able to design any type of engine, but only at the customer's expense. And McLaren doesn't have that such money, considering Niki's fee. Dennis began looking for a partner willing to participate in the order for Porsche. He arranged a meeting with Mansour Ouaran, a junior executive at Tech in Paris, and invited Niki along. Ron approached the topic very skillfully, but Niki was the biggest contributor to the success of Ron Dennis' idea. He managed to minimize the young boss' fear of failure. Lauda predicted that the engine that Porsche would design was simply bound to be the best. The possibility of failure could be excluded. These two meetings with Wolfgang Porsche and Mansour Ouaran became Niki's contribution to the project. In the summer of 1983, test runs began on the Porsche test track, and the results were worthy of Porsche from the very beginning. The 1983 Grand Prix season was already dominated by turbos, BMW, Ferrari, Renault, and McLaren had no chance. Niki insisted on getting the new engine into service as soon as possible in order to use the remainder of the already failed season as a series of tests. Partner objected. He didn't want any compromises for the rest of 83. He wanted to start 84 with a completely new car. However, through some machinations on the part of sponsors, Niki managed to convince the team of the need to conduct tests on the racetrack. McLaren started the last 4 races of the 83 season with a turbo and immediately suffered a host of problems. As one might expect, they didn't reach the finish line any of 4 races. However, at Kalyami the car was so fast that there was even hope of victory, but 6 laps before the end, the car froze without electricity. This was the race in which Piquet, Brabham BMW got the championship, the first turbo champion in the world. However, even more difficult times awaited Niki and McLaren. His partner John Watson apparently decided that he wasn't paid enough on the team, especially compared to his teammate, and demanded a good amount of contract extension. But then suddenly Alain Prost was fired from Renault. The breakup happened at the worst possible moment. As a rule, contracts are already signed in November. There are no free places. For Ron Dennis, the situation seemed ideal. He could throw the obstinate Watson and get the fastest racer in the world for ridiculous money. Of course, that's what happened. Alain Prost became a driver for the McLaren team. Niki, unlike Prost, was very expensive. Lauda negotiated a 2-year contract for 83-84 seasons, which again set a new record on the drivers' exchange. So in the eyes of Ron Dennis, he was the man who got too much out of him. But Alain Prost was his prize, his cheap buy.
I only knew one thing about Alain. He was fast. From a human point of view, I prepared for surprises, was distrustful and cautious. At first, it only intensified my feelings. He had an instinct to strengthen his position in the team. He visited the McLaren factory in England for no reason, forced all his charm to play on himself, and advertised himself. I had nothing to object to. A professional should be able to create a good working atmosphere for himself. I realized that he is a warm-hearted, pleasant, honest person. But unfortunately, he's fast as hell.
You can win qualifying, but the engine will burn out in the race. Points are awarded on Sundays. Do you want to be the best? Be fast. The 1984 season began with Niki's technical retirement and Alain Prost's first victory for McLaren. And thus, from the first racing day, Niki found himself on the defensive. He didn't yet know that throughout the entire season he won't be able to beat Alain in qualifying. Lauda won the second race at Kalyami by a full minute over Prost. Both riders retired at Zolder. Prost won at Imola, Niki didn't reach the finish line. Then came the French Grand Prix in Dijon, where Lauda for the first time decided not to be a computer, but simply drive as hard as he could. And he succeeded quite well, if not one pin. There was an agreement between the team and the driver to change tires mid-course. However, Niki wasn't called to boxes as Ron Dennis felt it that necessary. He didn't realize that the wild attacks were due to tire wear. Nevertheless, the Austrian managed to finish first.
I was angry at Ron Dennis because he didn't follow through on our mid-race agreement. It makes me angry all the time. If victory has to be won with great difficulty, it is necessary. Unnecessary risk is always stupid.
The next stage was Monaco. Monaco is the 6th race, and 6th time Prost has been faster than Niki in qualifying. This hurts and irritated Niki. Prost led the championship, Lauda was second, 6 points behind, and it will seem that the race was finally going as it should for him. Lauda was second behind Alain. However, he soon had to let Ayrton pass and again retired due to his own mistake. Niki wins at Brands Hatch. which helped level the championship standings, but the relationship between the driver and Ron Dennis became increasingly worse. He gave the whole team a bias towards Prost. The riders had the same material equipment and the same training, so Niki wasn't disadvantaged technically, but suffered from an unpleasant atmosphere. Niki was increasingly irritated by the cold silence, and he sought to clarify the situation. He invited Ron Dennis and his friend Lisa to fly to Ibiza and talk calmly there. At first the conversation went well. Niki had the feeling that a new basis for civilized cooperation had been found. But soon Ron abruptly interrupted the friendly conversation and changed it to business. Dennis offered to sign Niki for the next year for half his current fee. Naturally, this state of affairs didn't suit the Austrian, to which he replied, "It was nice to talk with you for a day on the boat, even if it all just went down the drain." From that moment on, Niki began to have thoughts of signing a contract for 85 season with another team, and soon Renault invites Lauda to discuss the contract. After long negotiations, LaRousse accepted all the conditions of the driver and also promised to keep everything in secret. Niki was afraid that if Ron found out about the agreement with Renault, he would certainly prevent him from taking the title. However, it wasn't possible to conclude the contract in one day, and Niki returned home. As soon as his plane landed in Ibiza, the phone rang. It was Ron Dennis. He told the details of the agreement. There was no doubt that Renault had leaked or even deliberately disclosed the secret. Regardless, Niki could say he didn't sign anything, and it was true. Dennis had calmed down. He continued to try to persuade Niki to agree to a half-payment agreement, but he already considered himself a Renault driver. Niki wins in the UK and then at home in Austria, thereby leveling on points with Prost. At the beginning of September, Niki received news that he must call LaRousse back. He informed Lauda that he cannot fulfill the term of the contract, since trade unions in France have become agitated over the amount of payment, while layoffs are common in the company. So Niki was without a contract, in the hands of Ron Dennis, and had only two championship deciding races ahead, the Nürburgring and Estoril.
So I went back again and asked the Marlboro people if they were interested in my services in the future. If yes, then they need to hurry up. They did it, and Dennis, a few days before the Nürburgring, offered a contract that I could sign. Although not with complete delight, since I earned a third less this way than before. But nevertheless, after 2 years of rather inflated terms of contracts with Lauda, I could accept it.
Prost became the sole and fantastic winner of the Nürburgring. Niki came only fourth, so the outcome was delayed for 2 weeks at the unknown track in Estoril. Training is a complete nightmare. Everything went wrong, like in a bad movie. Wasted time due to stupid breakdowns. On Sunday, Niki will be in 11th starting position, Prost in 2nd. The situation is so bad that there is no reason to worry. Start in the first turn, Niki remains in the middle of the track so that no one crashes into him. Having won 9th position, Niki understands that there is something wrong with the engine's power. The boost pressure needs to be increased from 2.2 to 2.5. The risk is great. At 2.5 the fuel consumption is too high. This can only be done for a very short time, otherwise there is no chance of driving the entire distance. Niki decides to take a chance. Now things have gone faster. Every second lap he overtakes the car. Finally Senna. Now Niki considers himself second. And this is all he needs for the championship. Signal from the pits. Niki is third. Between Prost and Lauda there is still Mansell in Lotus. He is 39 seconds ahead. Niki rides as hard as he can. Suddenly he sees a Lotus in front of him, then sees his front wheel lock up when braking, and realizes that someone is in trouble, and that is Mansell, and immediately overtakes him. And now he's already second, and that's all that was needed to win the title. It must be said that the Austrian has exhausted all eternal reserves this season. He already understood that next year it won't be possible to fight on equal terms with the young French. And indeed, the next year was a complete failure for Niki. It seemed as if some kind of curse hung over the Austrian while his teammate carefully raced towards the championship. Not a single race went smoothly. Computer breakdown, piston burnout, lack of voltage in the electrical system. In Monaco, Niki spun on an oil slick after the Pajamas collision. The engine stalled and didn't start again. Then Montreal. It became increasingly clear that something was wrong with the rear of the McLaren. In slow turns, the wheels vibrated and caused terrible slippage. Barnett knew this and said that a solution would soon be found.
In training, there was nothing but trouble. Nothing worked. Then I chose the wrong qualifying tires, and yellow flags suddenly appeared on my most important lap. I let off the gas, and at the last moment I noticed a beaver on the right side of the road. He looked me straight in the eyes, and I thought, please don't become suicidal. Stay where you are. He actually remained sitting still, and I flew 20 centimeters away from him. The time shown was only enough for 17th place, and when I told Ron Dennis about the beaver, he just smiled sympathetically, as if to say, poor old Niki. Now he has to make up animals to justify his slow ride. The next day, one photographer showed everyone pictures of the beaver. Dennis felt remorsed.
Returning again, this time the reason is the intercooler mounting bolt. In Detroit, the brakes, in Le Castle, the differential, in Silverstone, the electrics. A wheel came loose at the Nürburgring and the turbocharger died at the Österreich-Ring. It was clear that Dennis and Barnett were fully behind Prost this year, and his position in the championship fully justified all this aspiration from mid-season onwards. Sometimes the idea surfaced mainly in newspaper that a series of defects was Ron Dennis' revenge. This, of course, is nonsense. Dennis, although not a warm friend, isn't a criminal either. He won't intentionally program breakdowns. Bad luck 10 times in a row. Meanwhile, there was third place at Imola and fifth at the Nürburgring, but in both cases there were defects that didn't allow to take a higher place. This has never happened to any driver in the world so far. Well, as a result, the flame in the Austrian's eyes began to slowly but surely fade.
The fact that I more often found myself thinking about the dangers of this sport is a clear sign that I need to leave. I realized how much I think about survival, how important saving my own life has become to me. On the Friday before the Nürburgring race, I told Ron Dennis that I would not be racing for him or anyone else next year. He accepted it, but asked not to talk about it yet.
In Austria, Niki announced his Lauda press conference on Saturday at 9 o'clock. Nicholas Andreas Lauda has announced that he will permanently leave Formula One at the end of the season. He spoke about his plans to expand Lauda Air. He said that he was very tired and felt that it was time to stop. Since Ron Dennis was standing nearby, Niki thanked him and the McLaren team. Lauda's words were greeted with applause at home. Apparently Ron was very offended by this. Anyway, when it was the reporters' turn to ask all the questions, they turned to Ron Dennis. The topic immediately arose. What will happen next at McLaren? Dennis approached the microphone, but didn't answer the question, but with a strong wave of his hand pointed back to John Barnett and said, This is a truly great man who is realizing all our achievements. It was stupid and unpleasant. You could read it more the faces of the journalists. Before that word, he had to talk to Niki again. In further conversation, he finally identified his main problem. Barney and I work 15 hours a day, 365 days a year for this car, for this team. If then a race is won, then it was won by Prost or Lauda. No one is talking about us. It's wrong and unfair. We should be in the newspaper at least as often as the drivers. Niki told him that he was full of complexes and that discussions with him were boring and stupid. There is a barrier between them. Every racer had days when he wakes up with complete confidence that he will win today. This removes a huge number of problems from the driver, removes stress, gives confidence that today is the day. And if the technology doesn't let him down, he definitely wins. The Dutch Grand Prix was just such a day on August 25, 1985. Starting from the 10th position, by the middle of the race, Niki took the lead. Moreover, 9 seconds advantage. Process getting closer, closer and closer, each lap reducing the gap by a few tenths. With 6 laps to go, he caught up with him. Next should have been a classic overtaking on the starting line. It was necessary to simply cut off the opponent's brakes by exiting the slipstream. But to do this, he had to take a good position at the entrance directly. Instead, he just fell behind. It was in this corner that he tuned the car for more pressure, and although the tires looked much faster, they didn't help on the high-speed corner.
So I concentrate on making sure that the corner leading onto the long straight is particularly correct and clean. This was the finish line with an advantage of 2 car lengths.
When Prost got out of the car, he looked really upset. Barney and Ron are angry, although they covered it up with congratulations. Everyone else is happy.
Elaine said that I was riding incredibly hard. Of course, I replied. Why not? No one needs to tell you that Prost became a world champion with my help. If things get really critical, I'll be by your side. I promise. After which, he is again a kind and normal person. Elaine is simply wonderful. He is pleasant, kind, cordial. I treated him better the better I got to know him.
In 1985, we all got a brilliant champion, simple, fast in training, unerring in racing, began in the championship by inertia, competing in Formula 1. He was never able to see the checkered flag again. A completely different life began, completely without racing. There was now, however, plenty of money and Lauda Air could truly compete in the market. They began to buy serious aircraft, obtained a license for international flights, and slowly began to gain a place in the sun. But trouble came out of nowhere. The Boeing 767 crash was a strong blow for Lauda. All 223 people on board died. This is the largest disaster in the history of Austrian aviation. Lauda Air wasn't to blame, but from that moment on, Niki became very cold towards his brainchild. After many years of marriage, Niki broke up with Marilyn. He left his ex-wife a house in Ibiza and continued to take care of their children. Back in the late 90s, Niki decided to systematically return to the world of big prizes. He started working as a commentator, but didn't stay in this role for long, because the world concerned both the steward team and called Lauda to sort out all these matters. But he didn't manage to achieve results. The experience was unsuccessful, but most importantly it was acquired and learned. When Niki was called to work at Mercedes, he already knew what to do and how. he provided Mercedes with perhaps the main condition for their current Lewis Hamilton victories. Mindful of the problems that he had encountered, Niki tried his best to distance himself from the immediate management of the team and focus on what he had always been really strong at: negotiation with Bernie Ecclestone. He also negotiated gathering engineering personnel from literally everywhere. In general, be that as it may, but with help of Niki Lauda, the Mercedes Formula One team became the leader of the championship and dominated force. And back in 2005, Niki found true personal family happiness. Having a license to fly aircraft, Niki himself sometimes piloted a stewardess working on a flight where Lauda was the pilot. Birgit Wetzinger was 30 years younger than our hero, and she fell head over heels in love with him. And 8 months after their meeting, Niki began to have a problem with his kidney. The fact is that his brother's kidney had already been implanted earlier, but it worked for 8 years, and in 2005 he had to look for a new donor. Son Lucas wanted to donate this, but tests showed that it didn't meet the requirements. Then Birgit unexpectedly invited him to share a part of herself. They did all the necessary tests, and it turned out that the kidney was quite suitable. It was difficult for Niki to realize that the woman had given her kidney to the man she loved. The wife of the former Formula One driver Birgit Wetzinger became not only his wife but also his friend. In 2008 they got married, and in 2009 Birgit gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. They were named Max and Mia. And now the story comes to an end. Now I'm ready to answer the question I asked at the beginning. What are you willing to do for your dream? The answer is banal. Life. Live to enjoy this dream, go towards it, but don't drive yourself into pursuit. Nobody knows what will happen tomorrow in the near future. In racing, one simple rule is always forgotten: live and enjoy life. Niki didn't die racing at a time when dying in race was common, even commonplace. Lauda didn't die being on the verge of death. He returned to racing, won again, went into business, went through the world of corruption and won again. He became the director of a Formula One team. Lost, but 10 years later he returned again, became the director of another Formula One team and won again. He couldn't only overcome health problems. In fact, on May 20, 2019, Niki died from the same consequence of the same accident on August 1, 1976. It overtook him after 43 years. He found these 43 years want to become a legend, a living legend.